I'm Nima Rajan. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau told a crowd in Kamloops that he had hoped to make faster progress on reconciliation with First Nations. Prime Minister Trudeau apologized again for going on holiday instead of attending an event in Kamloops on the first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. Terry Teague, Regional Chief of the British Columbia Assembly of First Nations, told those attending the event that Indigenous people are beyond theatrics, platitudes and words and need to see action. Mr. Trudeau says there is a lot of catching up to do, but what took generations and centuries to break cannot be fixed overnight.
And it's easy to get shocked and outraged and say, well, that has to change. We have to fix it. Somebody ought to do something. And as much as the federal government needs to do, and as much as the federal government needs to do much more, it's on all of us across this country, and specifically not only on Indigenous Canadians across the country.
Mr. Trudeau called on all Canadians to do more to address the realities that Indigenous people in Canada face. All right, well, meanwhile, the NDP has filed a written complaint about the government's decision to delay the return of Parliament. NDP House Leader Peter Julian says delaying MPs' return to the House of Commons until November 22nd means emergency COVID-19 benefits will expire before Parliament can renew them. Cabinet can only extend most COVID benefits until November 20th without a new law. Senator Mary Lou McPhedran resigned from the Independent Senators group ahead of a hearing to consider kicking her out of the group. She resigned because she did not think she would receive a fair hearing. A hearing set up to consider expelling Senator McPhedran was struck after she sent an email in September to all senators questioning how the chamber's ethics code was being applied. Senator Yuen Pao-Wu, facilitator of the ISG, says she was offered an opportunity to defend herself through a fair and impartial hearing. Alberta's municipal election results won't be official until Friday, but it's looking like history will be made at the city halls of both Edmonton and Calgary. Calgary has elected its first female mayor, and Edmonton has elected its first mayor of color. Calgary City Councillor Jyoti Gondek will replace retiring longtime Mayor Naheed Nenshi in the mayor's chair. And in Alberta's capital, former federal cabinet minister Amarjeet Sohi defeated 10 other candidates to become Edmonton's first mayor of color. Pfizer is asking Health Canada to approve the first COVID vaccine for children aged 5 to 11. If and when the regulator greenlights the vaccine, developed in partnership with Germany's BioNTech, then doctors, nurses, and pharmacists will be able to start offering the COVID shot to kids. Child-sized doses are about 1/3 the size given to adults and teens aged 12 and up. Consumers and businesses expect continued cost of living increases. A Bank of Canada poll shows the outlook for inflation over the next year hit a new high in the quarterly survey. Respondents expect 3.7% inflation over the next 12 months. Still, consumers tell the bank they expect inflation will slow whenever the pandemic ends. The survey results also indicate people are more willing to search for new jobs, and businesses are willing to pay more to employ them. New Democrats are demanding the federal government clamp down on social media giants. Ontario MP Charlie Angus has called on Ottawa to establish an independent watchdog to address disinformation, hateful posts, and algorithm transparency on digital platforms.
It's all about the algorithms. That's where we need to focus, because the massive use of algorithms and AI and their deliberate misuse by Facebook must be addressed. The corporate heads at both Facebook and YouTube have realized that there's way more money to be made by driving viewers to extremist content than providing a wide array of choice. And the result of this, I think all of us can say, we've seen a breakdown of civil discourse.
Facebook whistleblower Frances Hogan testified before a U.S. Senate committee earlier this month that the company's products harm children and fuel polarization in the United States. The Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations in Saskatchewan says forced vaccinations are not part of its pandemic policy. The statement was issued after misinformation about Black Lake First Nations vaccination policy spread quickly online. The Federation claims it was a negligent Facebook Live recording adding the chief and council strongly refute the statements made in the video. It adds that Black Lake First Nation supports personal choice and the freedom to choose to be vaccinated or not. All right, stay tuned. We'll be back after the break with a look at daylight savings time and circadian rhythms. An interview with Dr. Michael Antle from the University of Calgary up next. University of Calgary Psychology Professor Michael Antle says Alberta would do better sticking with standard time, where one circadian clock is more in line with work schedules. A question on the ballot alongside Alberta's municipal elections yesterday asked voters if the province should adopt year-round daylight time. Dr. Antle says switching to daylight time permanently wouldn't make a difference in summer, but it would mean dawn would be at about 10 a.m. during winter in most of the province. University of Alberta Associate Psychology Professor Kyle Mathewson says having fewer hours of sunlight in the morning could have long-term health consequences. This includes increases in certain cancers, obesity, and diabetes. Well, joining us now to tell us more on the mental and physical impact of this potential change is Dr. Michael Antle himself, University of Calgary Psychology Professor. Sir, welcome to Forum Daily.
Good morning.
So let's start with this, Doctor. What kind of impact does a 1 hour time change have on the human body?
So our body, it follows two main clocks. One is, of course, the sun that our biological clock follows. And then the other one is our work clock, the one that our boss uses or our teachers use to tell us when to be at work or school. And you want to make sure there's not much of a conflict between those. And if they're in line, like they are on a more natural standard time, it's healthier for the body. But when there's a conflict, when they're out of sync, like when you make a time change, that's when problems start to creep up.
Now, some would consider this switch to daylight time relatively easy, but you say Alberta would do better sticking with this standard time that you mentioned. So this is rather than daylight time. So tell us a little bit more about the differences between standard time and daylight time and why we should switch to standard time instead.
Right. So every sleep and circadian organization in the world has been endorsing the move to standard time because it matches our circadian clock to our social clock, our work schedule. But in Alberta in particular, actually, Alberta follows a time that's not quite right for us. So we even have daylight time when we're on standard time, and the move to a permanent daylight time would actually be more like double daylight time. So it would actually accentuate the difference between our biological clock. So it doesn't seem like very much, just an hour, but because of the time we follow is kind of offset anyways, it would be really bad and hard for Albertans.
Now, meanwhile, the referendum question yesterday specifically mentions adopting a year-round daylight saving time. So what would that look like for Albertans throughout the seasons?
Right. So we have glorious long days in Alberta in the summer. They're really late sunsets, but we have a really strong photo period that changes quite a bit over the year. So in the winter, we have really short days. And if we're on daylight time, that means the sun doesn't rise in Calgary in December until after 9:30. It's close to 10 a.m. for Edmonton. Places to the west, like Grand Prairie, might not see the sun until almost 10:30 in the morning. And that's where the challenge comes in, trying to move to a daylight time.
And what kind of health problems could this switch to just daylight time in particular lead to, Doctor?
So they've looked at people who live at different sides of a time zone. So they all follow the same clock, but are, sorry, just, sorry, they're on different sides of the time zone. People on the west edge actually have a later sunset, and they have less sleep. So going along with the less sleep, you actually have increased rates of diabetes and cancer in those cases.
Now, that's really interesting, Doctor. So I really want to go back to Professor Mathewson's comment. How is sunlight connected to the overall health of people?
So sunlight is what our biological clock uses to set its phase. And that's where the problem comes in when we're following daylight time, is we're actually offset. So, and it's the morning light that's really critical. Our clocks run a little slow, and morning light helps keep them on time. And it also helps with our mood. So in Canada, because we have these short winter days, you had increases in seasonal affective disorder. And it's the morning light that seems to be most beneficial for helping keep those people happy.
And we know that you're advocating for a standard time across Canada. So what would that look like, and how would that benefit all Canadians?
Well, you get rid of the spring forward time change. And we know the spring forward time change is bad. And I think that was the goal of this referendum, was actually to get rid of that. And I've been arguing for about 15 years now to get rid of it. But unfortunately, we were presented with an alternative that was worse. Standard time helps keep our clocks more aligned with our circadian clocks. So that's why that would be better for us.
All right, doctor, just about 45 seconds here, but here's a thought. Can the circadian rhythms of Albertans eventually adjust to just daylight time in particular?
Well, they do okay with the changing photo periods. And so we do okay as the days get really long when there's a surplus of light in the summertime. But the hard thing is in the winter, there's not a lot of light. It's a very short day, and your body, your circadian clock craves that. And it's going to follow it. There's no way to get around that. So that part you can't really adjust to. You're not going to get used to it.
All right, Dr. Antle, some really interesting information there. Thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
Thank you.
When we come back, we'll take a look at stories from across Canada. Saskatchewan is sending COVID-19 patients to Ontario. Quebec is set to see its first all-electric ambulances on the road next year. That and more coming up next. The city of Vancouver has announced a mandatory COVID-19 vaccination for all of its staff. It says workers must be fully vaccinated against COVID-19 by December 6th, or they will not be allowed into the workplace. The only exceptions will be employees who require an exemption due to a medical or protected legal ground. It says the policy is aimed at limiting the impacts of COVID-19. The BC government has appointed a new sergeant-at-arms in the legislature. This is nearly 3 years after the former officer in the Assembly was suspended. The Legislative Assembly released a statement yesterday saying Ray Robitaille's appointment is effective immediately. Gary Lenz, the former sergeant-at-arms, was put on administrative leave in November 2018 amid a spending investigation. The prosecution service said in August that Mr. Lenz would not face charges. A proposed amendment has been tabled in Yukon to expand online sales and home delivery of cannabis products. Online purchases and home deliveries of cannabis are currently restricted to the Yukon government's e-commerce site, Cannabis Yukon. The proposed changes to the Cannabis Control and Regulation Act would pave the way for private cannabis retailers to sell products online and deliver them to Yukoners over the age of 19. Saskatchewan is sending some of its COVID-19 patients to Ontario hospitals by tomorrow. This is so they can get the intensive care they need in the pandemic's fourth wave. 6 critically ill COVID patients are being transferred from overcrowded ICUs. Saskatchewan says each patient transfer would cost $20,000, and the government would also pay to have 2 family members go with each patient. Premier Scott Moe admits his government could have acted sooner on a renewed mask mandate or proof of vaccination policy. All right, well, meanwhile, a Regina man is accused of sending a threatening email to 2 people, and one of them was Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe. The Regina Police Service says an investigation began October 4th with an email from a fake account. It was addressed to several people and allegedly threatened the lives and safety of an elected official and an official with the Saskatchewan Ministry of Health. Police say 2 individuals were mentioned by name. Mr. Moe's press secretary confirmed last night that Mr. Moe was the elected official. Charged with 2 counts of uttering threats is 38-year-old Tobichi Okuonu. Manitoba's health agency says there were no significant issues or service disruptions with the implementation of new COVID-19 vaccine requirements yesterday. Shared Health says 30 direct care workers across the province refused rapid testing and were subsequently sent home as of Monday afternoon. Many frontline workers in healthcare, education, and childcare must be vaccinated or undergo testing up to 3 times per week under the new workplace orders. Ontario Premier Doug Ford says the province and federal government will be making a huge investment in a Windsor, Ontario auto assembly plant. Formerly known as Fiat Chrysler Automobiles, Stellantis announced last week that it will cut its Windsor assembly plant down to 1 shift next spring. This amounts to a loss of about 1,800 jobs. The company says this is due to the effects of the pandemic and the semiconductor shortage. Stellantis cut the 3rd shift at the minivan plant last year at a loss of 1,500 jobs. Quebec will be seeing its first all-electric ambulances hit the road next year, which will position the province as a leader in electric transportation. Demers Ambulances and Lion Electric, 2 leading manufacturers of vehicles in North America, unveiled a new model. It is their first 100% electric ambulance. The companies plan to deploy 1,500 vehicles in North America before 2026, before marketing it globally. The body of a Montreal firefighter who drowned during a water rescue on the St. Lawrence River was recovered on Monday. Pierre Lacroix was one of 4 firefighters dispatched to rescue the occupants of a boat that was in trouble near the Lachine Rapids. He fell into the water after the rescue boat capsized. Firefighter Lacroix had been with the department for more than 30 years. New Brunswick's 6 Wolastoqey chiefs are calling on the province's new commissioner on systemic racism, this to take a stand against the province and its ban on land acknowledgements. Last week, the government ordered civil servants to stop referring to unceded or unsurrendered lands when speaking at public meetings. Tobic Chief Ross Perley says Commissioner Manju Varma should intervene to ask the Attorney General to stand down. The Newfoundland and Labrador government says it heard from 225 people about its plans to change the provincial coat of arms. The government wants to add Labrador to the 400-year-old coat of arms and remove the word savages from its official description. Officials say over 80% of respondents to the call for public input say they agree with the move. Some suggest the coat of arms should recognize the Innu, Inuit, and Mi'kmaq, as well as the Beothuk. We'll be back after the break with a look at stories from around the world. Stay with us. Human rights activists are urging international governments, sponsors, and athletes to boycott what they call China's genocide games. Activists disrupted the flame-lighting ceremony as Greece handed the flame over to organizers from China. They accused the International Olympic Committee of granting legitimacy to rights abuses in China by allowing the Winter Games to go ahead. The IOC has said the issue is beyond its remit. The world's facing an energy crunch, and Europe is feeling it most as natural gas prices skyrocket to 5 times what they were at the start of the year. Gas reserves that were depleted last winter haven't been made up as Russia holds back on supplying extra. Fears are rising that Europe will have to ration electricity if it's a cold winter. While China has also seen power outages, people worldwide are facing soaring utility bills. The global economy is using more energy as it rebounds from the coronavirus pandemic, straining gas, oil, and other fuel supplies. A new report warns that Africa's rare glaciers will disappear in the next 2 decades due to climate change. The World Meteorological Organization released the report today. It says Africa's 1.3 billion people remain extremely vulnerable as the continent warms more and at a faster rate than the global average. Africa's 54 countries are responsible for less than 4% of global GHG emissions. The European Union's top official says the recent ruling from Poland's constitutional court challenging the supremacy of EU laws is a threat to the bloc's foundations. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said she is deeply concerned by the ruling. She said it is a direct challenge to the unity of the EU and undermines the protection of judicial independence. Poland's constitutional court earlier this month ruled that Polish laws take precedence over those of the EU. South Korea's military says North Korea has fired at least 1 ballistic missile into the sea in what was likely a weapon designed for a submarine-based launch. Tuesday's launch came hours after the U.S. reaffirmed its offer to resume diplomacy on North Korea's nuclear weapons program. The leader of Lebanon's Hezbollah has declared for the first time that his powerful militant group has 100,000 trained fighters. Hassan Nasrallah disclosed the size of the Shiite group's militant arm. This was his first speech after deadly street violence erupted over the probe into the Beirut port explosion. Mr. Nasrallah also accused the head of a right-wing Christian party of seeking to ignite civil war. He accused the leader of the Lebanese forces of manufacturing Thursday's clashes. The president of Ecuador has decreed a state of emergency to confront drug trafficking and other crimes. He says the military and police will provide security on the street. In a national broadcast Monday, President Guillermo Lasso said there is only one enemy, drug trafficking. He pointed out that Ecuador has gone from being a trafficking zone to one that also consumes drugs. And he said that drug trafficking has brought an increase in homicides, home thefts, stolen vehicles and goods, and other robberies. The Central African Republic's leader is calling his unilateral ceasefire announcement a new effort to restore peace. President Faustin Archange Touadera defended his decision to ask Russian instructors and Rwandan forces to help counter rebels threatening the government. The decision sparked Western opposition. Despite differences, the UN Security Council called the ceasefire an important step toward implementing a 2019 peace agreement between the government and 14 rebel groups. A Russian court has outlawed a radical online group that has become infamous for its racist and sexist views. The regional court in Nizhny Novgorod banned the male state group as extremist. The Russian Interior Ministry has described the group as promoting a radical patriarchate and that it strives to challenge the country's constitutional order. An independent UN investigator is warning that despite the Nobel Peace Prize to courageous Filipino journalist Maria Ressa, gender equality and freedom of expression remains a distant goal. Irene Khan said Monday that women's voices are being suppressed by laws and policies of the state. This, as well as social customs, traditions, interpretation of religion, and growing fundamentalism around the world that has actually spurred the growth of misogyny and sexism. Ms. Khan says governments must take the issue of gender stereotyping more seriously. Israeli archaeologists say a scuba diver has salvaged an ancient sword that experts say dates back to the Crusaders. Israel's Antiquities Authority said Monday that the man spotted the meter-long sword amid a trove of ancient artifacts while on a weekend dive in northern Israel. Fearing the sword would be covered up by shifting sands, it says the diver handed it over to government experts. The diver was given a certificate of appreciation for turning over the 900-year-old item. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and this was Forum Daily News. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time.